Welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast. I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Thank you for joining us as we uncover how stories are one of the most important aspects of your business. We'll talk about struggles, victories, and how you can utilize strategic storytelling to inspire those around you to action. Enjoy this episode. Traveling all around the country, I get asked a question quite often in my trainings. And I think it's very interesting. And that question is, how do you create a culture of collaboration? How do you take employees and get them from having differences and maybe conflict to get them to collaborate? So that's why I'm really excited about today's conversation, because today I'm joined by Patrick Aylward, who is a speaker, workshop leader, and the author of The Collaborative Path. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you, Matt. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm excited as well, and I'm really excited to talk about collaboration with you. And I want to dive in and talk about collaboration from your perspective and then also from the perspective of others. So I want to start with you, and I want you to paint the picture for us, because I feel like the word collaboration means different things to different people. So when I say to you, collaboration, what's the picture that comes up in your mind?
The picture that comes up in my mind is the deliberate pursuit of dual outcomes, better solutions to situations, plus stronger relationships among participants. And that's not the picture that comes up in most people's minds.
For sure. So when you say dual outcome, and when we're talking about collaboration, is it more like negotiation? Would you consider collaboration part of negotiation, or do you consider it completely different components?
Completely different departments.
Okay.
Most people have this picture of collaboration, that collaboration is, let's all play nice and get along. And at the end, we'll sing Kumbaya by the campfire. That's not collaboration at all.
Okay.
Collaboration is the exploration of differences and different perspectives around a situation with a view to finding the optimal outcome, while at the same time strengthening the relationships among the participants. And that's not how we do things now. We do things now by debate. You know, if we have a problem, right? If we have a problem, what's the first thing you do? First thing you do is you figure out your solution, right?
Sure.
So if I'm looking at it, and I figure out my solution, now we got two solutions. Then what do? You're going to tell me why yours is better, and I'm going to tell you why mine is better.
Sure.
And then, like, when we're doing that, does it ever occur to you that you're wrong and I'm right? Because it doesn't to me. I figure You're wrong and you just don't know it yet. So it's my job then to help you to see the light.
Okay.
And so what I do then is I build arguments to support my side and to tear yours apart. And we call that problem solving. And if we do it in a friendly way, we call it collaboration. And it's still, in the essence, that's a debate, isn't it?
Sure. So when you say optimal outcomes, is it the outcome of the company, the outcome of the organization? Is it an outcome of a specific value? So if a company has certain core values, they have a certain value that they want to hit. So it's the optimal outcome for that value, or the optimal outcome for those two individuals?
I think ultimately, for the success of a business, it's the ultimate outcome or optimal outcome is the one that is best for the long term of the clients, the business, and the participants.
Okay.
You know, it's kind of like Cotter's concept of a vision. A good vision has a general appeal to a variety of people. It's the same kind of thing in terms of the outcome.
Okay. So we're talking about the differences between collaboration and debate, collaboration and negotiation. What I find fascinating is your background's in law, right? You're an attorney by trade. So how did you how did you learn along the way through your career that collaboration was going to position companies over that debate ideals?
The mediation was one of those things I always wanted to learn. And I thought, why would you ever leave a lucrative law practice to go do that? And then through a strange event, it ended up that I did end up leaving the practice of law and then studied mediation. Then I realized how much better it was, how much more efficient it was, and the solutions. Like, I don't think anyone debates or questions even the inherent value of mediation versus litigation. The problem, though, is that both litigation and mediation are reactive solutions. Collaboration is proactive. It's really designed to prevent conflict before it begins.
Interesting. Okay, so it's more proactive than reactive. So how can leaders set the tone from a starting perspective to put whether checks and balances or a system in place to try to prevent conflict from happening?
What I encourage is that people start with collaborative conversations, changing the ordinary discourse, which is a debate model, changing from that to a collaborative conversation model. And then from there, it starts to embed itself within the corporate culture. So I think perhaps the easy way is to explain it as this is what we do now, and this is what this model looks like. So what we do now is kind of what, like you and I just talked about, in terms of we look at a problem and we see it differently. As soon as people see it differently, they don't leverage that opportunity that lies in the differences of perspectives. Instead, they choose one or the other. So they proceed on a debate type of approach. What my collaborative model does is, from the moment we discover differences, not 3 years down the road when the trial is almost there over the differences, but at the moment we discover differences, we follow these simple 6 steps. Step 1, we set parameters for the conversation. So we create an atmosphere of safety and respect to have the conversation. Step 2, we exchange perspectives. So we exchange how we're experiencing the situation and how it's impacting us, what we see the impacts of it. And when we're doing that, we can listen to learn about the other's experience. Whereas in a debate, you're listening only to rebut. That's the only reason why you would ever listen in a debate. When we understand a little better about each other's perspectives, then we can describe the issue neutrally and broadly, step 3. So when we describe the issue in that way, what we're doing is we're putting the problem or situation in a context where we can both contribute ideas to its solution, instead of constraining ourselves to either your solution is right or mine is right.
So let me just back up and go through the 3 real quick, just to make sure that I'm hearing you right. So step 1 was setting parameters.
Yeah.
Step 2 was the exchange of perspectives, and then 3 was
describe the issue neutrally and broadly.
Describe the issue neutrally and broadly. Okay.
Right. So unlike a debate, in a debate, it's either this or it's that, and either and or are mutually exclusive. So after the issue is described, so it opens the conversation to possibilities, then the participants would identify interests. And you can think of these as what would be important to each of us in a solution. When we identify things of interest, a compatibility will emerge on a variety of points. But even just when we take the time to identify what's important to us in a solution, then we can start to generate options. In a debate, of course, you start with the two options and then you choose between them. So it's simply a pro and con exchange till you get there. In this, once you've identified in step 4 the things of importance or identify interests, then you can go to step 5, which is to generate options. But now the options are targeted to get us what we want. So I know what you want, you know what I want, and there's some level of compatibility between those two lists.
Okay.
And then we select solutions, step 6. And we select solutions, it's what is the package of options that get us the most of what we said was important to us.
Sure. Okay. So let's talk about the parameters part, the first part, because obviously if the parameters aren't properly set within an organization, the 6 steps that you just mentioned aren't going to work, right? So from a parameters perspective, it's really a leader coming in and creating that culture of collaborative conversations and setting the tone for, we're not going to try to continue to antagonize and debate, but we're going to be looking for optimal outcomes. So from a parameters perspective, how would a leader set parameters in the first place? What would happen? As a part of a policy? Is it part of a mission statement on how employees should talk to one another? Because I mean, language is important. Are we screaming at one another? Are we kind to each other? Are we connecting? I see a lot of companies that really have a culture of really figuring out language, and not just English or Spanish, but language, the way we speak to each other, regardless of what the language is. So can you talk a little bit more about the parameters aspect?
The parameters probably ultimately in a corporation ends up being embodied in like the values and the communication parameters. And it is about how we address each other. It can't be, though, a matter of instilling political correctness that really defeats high quality communication in a lot of cases. Sure. It has to be about the value of listening to learn. But first it has to start with becoming aware that we're using a debate model now to start with. Sometimes whether we debate in a friendly manner or in a ferocious manner, if we're still narrowing the situation to an either or choice, if we're still exchanging pros and cons, if we're still listening so that we can find a weakness to attack, even if it's a gentle attack back, we're still constraining ourselves to 2 options. We're still early evaluation and dismissal of everything the other person says. And we're still, in the end, ending up with an option that one is more happy with than the other and tends to be presented as a win. In effect, it's a win-lose option or a win-lose solution. So the whole thing about setting parameters is to talk about how are we going to conduct our meetings, right? So are we going to actually go around and everybody is going to get a chance to speak? Are we going to speak in rebuttal to each other? Or are we simply going to talk about what our perspective is on the situation? Are we going to shoot down each other's ideas when we're in that initial round of conversation? Or are we simply going to explore what the situation looks like from each person's perspective and then figure out how to describe the issue in a way that we can all address it? So it's Sure. Those kinds of things, and it does start with the leader. Like, are you building a consensus, or are you making a decision that's an either or?
Sure. I appreciate you mentioning that. So there's a few things I want to unpack with what you said, because I think it's really important to focus on. And one of the things that I find fascinating, especially when it comes to corporations, is I'm not aware of any corporation that would say we don't want to be innovative. Because innovation is very, very highly coveted within the business world, right? We want innovative organizations. But what's interesting to me is there is a difference between innovation and creativity. And what I find fascinating, is a lot of companies today are willing to buy innovation, but they're not willing to create a culture of creativity. And then what's also fascinating to me is as a society, we warm up for almost everything. I mean, a racer would not dream of running a race and not warming up prior to doing that, right? Like we have warm ups, we have stretches, we have all these different things. But when it comes to collaboration and meetings, a lot of times we don't warm up. We get right into it. And a lot of times I see organizations, they start almost from a hostile, toxic mindset. And what I found fascinating in the last few years that I've done a lot of trainings and workshops is I really focus on the creativity piece. And there's a lot of exercises companies can do to get their minds and their team members' minds in a creative state, because it sets the tone, right? We're talking about tone setting and getting into it and having this collaboration. And it really gets the mind warmed up to have the surge of creativity, to be willing to hear people out. So can you speak to the element of changing a company culture from limiting beliefs, from debate, from high level negotiation where one person wins and one person radically loses, to being more creative? Because doesn't creativity and collaboration go hand in hand in a certain way?
They absolutely do. And there's two pieces to that, I guess. The first is imagine if the leader came in and said, the objective of this meeting is to leave here with a solution that we don't have yet, that's not in anyone's mind. Because when we go to meetings, we go there with the idea that I have the solution, and now all I got to do is convince the other people to go along with me. That happens so often. Setting the set parameters piece, that's kind of a piece of that, is making the conversation open for possibilities within an atmosphere of safety and respect. The second piece of that I wanted to mention is that what kills creativity quicker than anything else is early evaluation. And in a debate, that happens every time somebody opens their mouth. So in the collaborative model, when we're generating options at step 5, we're never evaluating any options. There's no such thing as a bad idea. We've all been to those kinds of meetings where something that we initially thought, ooh, that doesn't look so great, turned out to be a springboard for something much better. And that postponement of evaluating ideas is such a huge piece.
Sure.
And so the creativity is very difficult to foster in a debate environment, because we are constantly evaluating everybody's ideas as they're spoken. And in fact, that's how you debate. How you win a debate is by finding the weakness and attacking on what the other person just said.
Sure. And that's, I mean, finding someone's weakness and attacking is not going to help to that optimal outcome that you had talked about. It's not going to help the organization, because it's really me focused versus you focus for the organization. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. So I do want to dive into something that is on a lot of leaders' minds today, something that we don't really know what the future holds as far as how this will look. I mean, we have some idea, but it's definitely something that's on a lot of people's minds. And that is, a lot of business leaders that I speak with are having a tremendous amount of difficulty figuring out how to have collaboration with in-person employees and virtual employees. So you have in-person and virtual, and it's all over the map, depending on where you are in the world, depending even here in the States, depending on where you are in the United States. Mm-hmm. How can leaders get buy-in regardless of where an employee is? Do you think that this is a lot more challenging when you have a hybrid meeting? Is there more collaboration when everyone's in person? Have you seen different research pieces on this that would lead you to believe one way or another?
I haven't seen any research on that. My expectation is that it's probably more effective in an all virtual or an all in person. And I think that it can be equally effective, properly moderated, And using the collaborative model, it really doesn't make any difference if you're in the same room or not. And it goes back to setting the parameters. Like, is everybody getting an equal amount of time? Are we encouraging people to listen to learn? Are we encouraging everyone to be open to possibilities? And then, do we have a sequence? Do we have a pattern for how we hear people? If you're on the phone and 4 other people are in the office, like, does everybody stay silent when you're speaking on the phone, the same as you do when someone is in the meeting? Do we have an agreement when we set parameters that we won't interrupt each other? Those kinds of things are absolutely essential if you want to create a sense of equality and equal participation. Do we have a pass? So 2 people have talked about it, and then the third person might go, I'm just going to pass and listen right now. Do we have a process whereby we intentionally come back to the person who passed, so that everybody gets the chance to speak once before anybody gets a chance to speak twice? Do we have an agreement that when we are in our initial rounds, we aren't going to be speaking to rebut what anyone else said? Our objective in sharing our perspective is to expand the intel in the room, not to limit our choices to either or. Those are absolutely crucial, Matt, to how you have a successful meeting, in person, hybrid, or both.
Sure. Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that. And what I'm hearing, a lot of this is more philosophical than room, right? Someone being in the room or outside the room. Because I really feel like this goes back to a limiting belief of a lot of business leaders out there. From what had happened was, all right, we had a situation that everyone knows how the story was in 2020, where everyone was pivoting, everyone was going to virtual, and now it's swinging back in a big, big way, where there are a lot of employers, they want everyone back in the office. And I don't want people to lose that element of creativity. If there's something we've learned in the last 2 years, it is we have options that we never thought we had before. We have the ability to connect with people all over the world faster, stronger, better than we ever had before. And yes, there is a lot to be said about in-person meetings, but I don't want business leaders to have these limiting beliefs that they can box out the creativity. Hybrid events are not going anywhere. I mean, hybrid events, I really do think that they're here to stay. And I feel like business leaders need to embrace it. And I think what you're talking about, Patrick, this collaboration, it's not a luxury, it's a need, right? And it's a need more now than ever before, especially with so much happening with employee conflict based on in-person or virtual or hybrid. I feel like it's all over the map. So setting the tone for that meeting is going to be mission critical to the success of that outcome.
I agree. I wrote an article actually for, what was that, HR Gazette, and it was workplace temperatures are rising, and what managers are missing and how they can fix it. And it talked about using a values collage tool, which would be a great way to start. It was really intended for bringing people back into the office. If your listening audience hasn't seen that, it might be worthwhile for them to check out. It was about bringing people back into the office, but it was also about why tensions were rising in the virtual world, why conflict was so much more rampant in the virtual world than it had been in person.
Interesting.
And the short answer to that is that if you and I are in the same office and we're in a meeting and you shoot down 3 of my ideas, I mightn't be too ticked at you because we had coffee earlier. I kind of knew where you were going on it. We talked about the kids playing ball on the weekend, and we had other pieces that were relational. And the shooting down of my ideas was task. In the virtual world, what's happened is there's no time spent in the relationship element of Zoom calls. As a result, everything is tasked. And then if you take the idea that we start those decision-making conversations on a debate format anyway, where when I think I'm right, my idea then is to convince you to go along with me, and I think you're wrong. And so I'm constantly tearing at your side and building mine up. I mean, there's no relationship piece in that either. So the idea was that if you use our common humanity and our common set of values to connect with people, then people can have the other conversations that are purely solution oriented without the conflict and the harm piece of it.
Sure. That's fascinating to me, Patrick. And it's so true. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I've been in an in-person meeting and the meeting will end and I'll be walking out with someone and we're walking out of the door and there's a side conversation that happens and it builds an incredible business relationship and an idea comes out that wasn't thought of in the meeting. And it's amazing what we missed out on because of all the virtual, all those side conversations, all those little things that you can't really see virtually that happen in person. So I do appreciate you mentioning that. It is fascinating. And also, if you can let me know the article, I'll put in the show notes just so people can click and go to. I think that'd be really good. But Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate everything you shared. And I want to talk about 3 key takeaways that I had from this conversation. I love that you talked about collaborative conversations. You had talked about steering away from always going in with that debate mindset and going in with the optimal outcome mindset. Really focus on those collaborative conversations. Then I really appreciate something you said that I think is so critical that we've lost as a society in the last couple of years. And we understand why, but you said setting the tone of the meeting can be paramount to a meeting's success, right? Setting the tone. And oftentimes we were so in survival mode with meetings that we haven't really talked about how to truly thrive with meetings. And everyone's talking about being burned out from meetings. Well, if the tone is set and there is collaboration and there is creativity, people are going to be fueled by those meetings. People are going to feel like they truly had an impact with the decision-making process. I think that's really important. And then the third piece that I got was it doesn't matter if it's in person, if it's virtual, if it's hybrid, if they follow the 6 different steps that you had talked about, it's more of a mindset. It's not who's in the room or who isn't in the room. It's really based on mindset. So I really appreciate everything you said, Patrick. If someone listening wants to get more information about you on different things that you do through your trainings, where's the best place that they can find out a way to connect with you?
The easiest way is through my website, www.collaborativepath.ca.
Okay.
The easiest way to get a better understanding of my collaborative model is probably to go to my YouTube channel, Collaborative Path. And then, of course, my book, The Collaborative Path, is available on Amazon and the usual business sites for purchasing books.
Perfect. All right. So I'll include all that in the show notes. People can just click, they can get right to you, get more information on you, what you do. But Patrick, thank you again. I really appreciate your time and I appreciate you going through all those different stages with us.
Thank you, Matt. That was my pleasure. I was really thrilled to have the opportunity to appear on your podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you have a story that you would like to share, feel free to drop an email to matt@mattzaun.com with the subject line Stories with Traction. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, where I share tons of resources on how you can be a better storyteller. Remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.